As acclaimed scientist, Dr. Vincent Kroll stepped from the driverless taxi and assisted his female companion out onto the sidewalk. The crowd outside closed in on the police barricade. People jostled each other to get a better view and to snap pictures. Most of the gathered crowd outside the back entrance of the concert hall that night were excited, having read online about the upcoming performance. But others were angry, hateful, violent even. Protesters held up middle fingers at the scientist, spit on the sidewalk, and shouted obscenities. One man was carrying a placard on a pole, and as they were led inside the building, Dr. Kroll glanced back and looked at the protesters' sign. It read, "God made them bones. You made them clones." Beneath these words, a cartoon image of an ugly caveman was overlaid with a red circle and a red line through it. As the doors shut behind them, the noises of the crowd in the street died away, and the sounds of the concert's preparation rose up. Techies setting up lights, instruments being tuned, opera singers exercising their voices. Kroll turned to his female companion.
"Are you doing all right, Pandora?"
The young woman did not answer, except she turned and looked up at the scientist who had created her. To others, the gaze of her small, dark eyes might look empty, vacant, stupid even. But Vincent Kroll knew better. He withered under her stare, shuddering, and brought a shaky hand up toward the side pocket of his suit. He had a flask of liquor in that pocket, but before he could pull it out and begin his evening ritual of dulling his inner pain with drunkenness, someone approached them in the hall.
"You're here! Excellent!"
A tall man with a lavender-dyed pompadour and a matching tuxedo extended a hand to Dr. Kroll.
"So very nice to see you in person after all our virtual rehearsals. I'm Dieter Zhao, Board of Directors here at the Symphony. We are delighted to have you both here. This will truly be an historic performance, and such a fine way for the arts community here to hearken in the 22nd century in style, wouldn't you say?"
Zhao's eyes hovered briefly over Dr. Kroll's suit, which was old and rather threadbare. People always assumed someone as famous as Vincent Kroll would be extremely wealthy, which couldn't have been further from the truth. He was now more in debt than ever.
"We're happy to be here,"
Kroll lied.
"And while I have you, about her payment?" "Oh, that will all be handled, don't you worry, Dr. Kroll. Now then."
Zhao cleared his throat, and with a strange expression of mingled awe and trepidation, he turned and looked down at Pandora. She was to be the star soloist of tonight's concert, and the stakes were high. The classical music world was abuzz with anticipation, awaiting the performance of this unlikely new artist. Pandora was just over 4 feet tall. Her hair, eyes, and skin were all the same shade of deep brown. Her head was large and elongated, her face flat and rather plain, her jaw jutting. Her forehead was rather small and slanted, ending in a jutting brow with bushy eyebrows. The heavy brow cast a shadow over her face and the harsh light of the hallway.
"Remarkable!"
gushed Zhao, after staring at her for a whole 10 seconds.
"It is remarkable. A real live Gen 2 Og in the flesh. My hat is off to you, Dr. Kroll. It's beautiful."
A muscle twitched angrily in the scientist's gaunt face.
"She. I beg your pardon? She is beautiful, Mr. Zhao, not it. And please refrain from using the derogatory term Og in my presence. Neanderthal clones, such as Pandora here, are human persons, both legally and scientifically." "Ah, well, of course. I meant no offense. Please do accept my apologies. Now, come along. I'll lead you and her to the dressing room. Our seamstress has done her best with the costume based on the on Pandora's unique measurements."
Zhao spun on his heels and started down the hall. Kroll nodded to Pandora, then the two of them fell in step behind Zhao.
"Are you an aficionado of the opera, Dr. Kroll?"
Zhao asked as they walked, pausing briefly at a mirror to adjust his absurd pompadour hairdo.
"Fan of opera? Me? No, not at all." Pity. Well, tonight represents the finale of our current showcase of the finest arias in opera history. The doll's song, as the aria is known, harkens from Jacques Offenbach's 1880 masterpiece, Tales of Hoffmann. You'll know the plot, of course.
Dr. Kroll slid a hand into his pocket, letting his fingers rest against the cold metal of his flask, wondering how long it would be before he had a chance to start drinking. Too long, that's for sure.
What's that? Oh, the opera? It's about a doll or something.
Zhao snickered.
It's more than that, and I would think a scientist like you would especially appreciate it. You see, the themes in that particular opera fantastique were way ahead of their time. Why, it's practically science fiction. The woebegone protagonist, Hoffmann, falls deeply in love with a lifeless automaton, a robot. Imagine what they must have thought of that in 1880, eh? These days, the implications are numerous. Personally, it reminds me of a nephew of mine, moved to Tokyo to buy a droid body for his AI girlfriend. They had a wedding and everything. My sister was furious at me for not attending, but really, it's repugnant. Anyway, tonight, the role of the singing automaton doll will be performed by your...
He looked over Pandora, his head cocked to one side.
What do I call her? Your creation? Your experiment? Surely not your daughter. You can just call her Pandora, Mr. Zhao. Ah, yes. Well, Pandora will be performing the character's infamously difficult aria. Very few sopranos can do it justice. But, of course, your lab has made a superstar here, Doctor. I said it the first time I saw her singing online. Voice like an angel. She belongs on the stage. Tell me, Dr. Kroll, man to man, did you do anything in designing her DNA? Find some way to enhance certain qualities, perhaps?
Kroll sighed, not bothering to hide his growing irritation.
Pandora is pure Neanderthal, Mr. Zhao, I assure you. She is an exact recreation of a woman who lived 41,000 years ago, soon before their kind went extinct.
Zhao held up his hands in mock surrender.
Very well, I'll take your word for it. It's just that her talent is so unexpected. Not to speak ill of your earlier work, Doctor, but, well, let's face it. The Gen 1 Neanderthal clones were all a bit dull, weren't they? My building still has a Gen 1 Ogog for a doorman. It does add a bit of drama to the entrance, seeing him standing there in a suit and top hat. But the Ogog doesn't really do anything. More like a statue than a real person. No offense again, but like I said, these new Gen 2 models, like Pandora here, so talented.
Zhao led them into a dressing room, where a pair of nervous young makeup artists approached Pandora, who looked to Dr. Kroll for instruction. When he nodded and told her to go with them, she allowed herself to be led to a chair and sat. Kroll watched his creation from across the room. Pandora's dark eyes stared out from under her heavy brow, gazing into her own reflection on the wall of mirrors, as the women began to spread creams and powders onto their stoic face, transforming the short, dark Neanderthal clone into a life-sized doll with rosy cheeks and pale, chalky skin. Half an hour later, Kroll watched from the wings backstage as Zhao himself led Pandora onto the stage. The crowd erupted in boisterous applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation, even though she hadn't yet sung a single note. They had dressed Pandora in a frilly gown and put a giant white bow in her hair, which, proving too thick and coarse to style properly, they had left down to spill over her shoulders. She stood in the spotlight, just as they had instructed her to do so, with her arms held out to either side. Like a crucifix, Kroll thought, and he had the sudden nasty feeling that he was Pontius Pilate here. Or would it be Judas, sacrificing the dignity of his beloved Pandora for a few silver coins? But he really did need the money. Even after starting back up cloning production in his lab and releasing this new generation, Kroll was still running behind the new competitors in the Far East. Labs in Beijing, Singapore, and Seoul were even now growing hundreds of thousands of perfect Neanderthal clones. He saw a pair of those foreign models in the front row of the audience now. They were two of the only people not on their feet applauding. The clones were short, heavy-browed, identical teenage boys, dressed in suits and sitting beside a Korean woman Kroll thought he recognized from a cloning conference years ago. He had to admit, she did good work. They looked perfect.
So it begins,
Kroll muttered to himself, as Zhao left the stage and the audience sat back in their seats, their eyes fixed hypnotically on the exotic soloist. The conductor in the pit began to paint the air with her baton, and as the woodwinds responded with twinkling notes from their instruments, Kroll reached into his pocket and finally drew out his flask. He unscrewed the cap and brought it to his lips, savoring the burn of the strong liquor in his throat as Pandora began to sing. Her voice was like silk in sunlight, each bouncing note clear and perfect, resounding around the concert hall so that every face broke into a smile and many eyes filled with tears. Hidden in the wings, Kroll chugged the liquor in the flask, welcoming the warmth flowing through his stomach and eagerly awaiting its effects on his anxious mind.
"Oi!"
said a hushed voice to his left. Kroll flinched and looked over. A stagehand holding a clipboard under one arm was leaning toward him from the shadows.
"You're him, right? The scientist?"
Kroll rolled his eyes and stuffed the flask back into his pocket. He turned and pretended to be watching the performance.
"You're proper famous,"
whispered the stagehand, apparently not taking the hint.
"Why aren't you in a box seat or something?" "Oh, Christ,"
mumbled Kroll, and he went ahead and pulled out the flask for another long sip, no longer caring how he might be perceived. After he had swallowed again, he turned to the stagehand.
"Anyone in the dressing room right now?"
The stagehand blinked, eyebrows raised, then whispered,
"I don't know. Probably not. Why?"
In answer, Kroll pushed past him and walked into the hall behind the stage. Much to the scientist's dismay, the stagehand followed him.
"Don't you want to hear the performance?" "I've heard her sing it in 100 rehearsals. It's always the same. She never misses a note. She never changes it up. It's perfect from the start. Always."
Kroll pushed open the door and swept into the dressing room. There was no one inside. He walked straight to a couch in the corner, shoving off a backpack and empty viola case that someone had left on the cushions. He slumped onto the couch, pulling out his flask for a third long sip. The stagehand stood in the dressing room doorway, confused, unsure of whether the scientist was breaking any rules by being back here.
"I take it. That's not orange juice in there?"
Kroll wiped his lips and grinned. He was starting to feel tipsy, thank goodness.
"Absinthe! Nectar of the gods! Care for a taste, young man?" "No thanks. I'm, working." "Then why did you follow me in here,
Checking the hall, the stagehand shut the door quietly and approached the couch.
"I don't know, man. It's you! I'm Linus, by the way."
He held out a hand, but the scientist didn't bother shaking it.
"I wrote a report about you and the 3rd grade." "Did you now?"
groaned Kroll, sinking lower into the couch and closing his eyes.
"Yeah, for real."
Linus pulled over a chair and sat, setting the clipboard on his lap.
"We had just gone on a field trip to the National Zoo. We went to see Tusky, the first woolly mammoth clone. Of course, you know all about Tusky. You made him. I was really excited to go. It sounded awesome. But when I saw it, I don't know. I was kind of disappointed. He was just an elephant in a fur coat, basically."
Kroll sighed and shook his flask. There were only a few drops left.
"But then I read that you had created the Ogogs, and wow, you brought back a whole nother branch of humans. That's crazy! And I know a lot of people weren't impressed by the Gen 1s, because they were so docile and dumb and stuff. But I still thought it was cool. And now, with the Gen 2s? Crazy! Everyone I read about is more impressive than the last. There's that one Ogog in Japan that's breaking all those Olympic records. And the math savant, that engineer who keeps making those insane architecture designs. And you practically broke the internet when your little Pandora singer out there went viral. A true artist. That's what you made. You've created a race of geniuses with Gen 2.
Even with his eyes closed, the room was swimming in Vincent Kroll's mind. He was properly drunk now, and savoring the loss of control, of shame, of fear.
Pandora is not a Gen 2,
he mumbled.
What do you mean?
Kroll could hear Pandora singing through the walls, muted, but still so beautiful. He thought about what it must have sounded like 41,000 years ago, back when Neanderthals wandered the world side by side with Homo sapiens. What music they must have made back then. What wonders.
Why'd you say she isn't a Gen 2? What?
Kroll opened his eyes. His vision was blurred. The room swirled around him.
It's just... What you call Gen 1 was actually the second. So, Pandora, she's technically Gen 3.
Really? I've never heard that before. But then, what happened to the actual first generation of clones you made?
What indeed, Linus? What indeed?
Moaned Kroll. Tears came suddenly to his eyes, and where at first the alcohol had dampened his feelings of guilt and sorrow, it now did the opposite, elevating his negative mood so that he broke down in wet sobs.
Whoa! Hey! You okay, sir?
Kroll looked up at the stagehand and sniffed.
I made them secret, you see. No one ever knew. No one could ever know what happened to them.
Why? What happened?
Kroll went for another drink. When only a few drops came out of the flask, he grunted and tossed it onto the couch beside him. He wiped at his teary eyes, then leaning back against the cushions, he exhaled, long and exhausted beyond his years. The liquor was burning inside him. His heart felt heavy and his tongue felt light, and so he spoke. He spoke to the young man with the clipboard, and for once, Vincent Kroll told the truth, or at least, most of it.
I grew 40 Neanderthal embryos in artificial wombs. 40. And every embryo survived, flourished, and came out strong. 40 perfect infant clones, red-faced and howling. It was a miracle. And they were beautiful. Oh yes, so beautiful. With their little hairy bodies and their small dark eyes. But then, well, I had predicted that they would be intelligent, somewhere between bonobos and Homo sapiens. But what those infants displayed was off the charts, tracking objects visually on the first day and grasping within a week. By 3 months old, they were escaping their cribs and crawling around the lab. And by 6 months, they were speaking. I couldn't believe it. At first, I thought they were just babbling, but soon I realized it was language. But not English, no. It was their own language.
Linus leaned closer.
What do you mean? They were babies. Who taught them another language?
Kroll shrugged, suppressing another bout of sobs and sucking in a breath to calm himself.
No one. Maybe mimetic encoding in the DNA? But I don't think so. I think the infants created the language themselves, right there in the lab, whispering crib to crib. They worked together as a unit, you see, like tiny soldiers. And they were planning something. I just knew they were. I could see it in their eyes and sense it in the way they looked at me, so full of rage. I loved them, but they hated me. And I began to fear what I had created. And so...
A lump came into Kroll's throat. He swallowed painfully, and blinking tears from his eyes, he whispered,
I discarded them, all 40, on the same night.
Linus sat back in his chair, sneering.
Wait, you mean to say you killed 40 infants? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that?
You weren't there,
said Kroll miserably.
It all has to do with the past. I'm sure of that now. For tens of thousands of years, different branches of early humans coexisted in this world. Interbred even. But then something happened. I think it was a war. A clash of cousins, I think. I think our Homo sapien ancestors feared the Neanderthals were better, stronger, and so they committed genocide against them.
Whoa! Well, that's quite the claim, sir.
They knew.
Kroll continued, his voice a gravelly whisper.
Somehow, they knew. Those little children in my lab.
He let his eyelids droop, let the playful music from the concert hall mingle in his head with the horrible memory of their screaming voices as those little ones died, vomiting blood from their poisoned food, their eyes blazing in their flat little skulls.
God made them bones. I made them clones. I resurrected our oldest enemies. That's what I did. And I was their first contact with the modern world. It was a chance to start new relations anew. But me being me, I put the whole world at risk. That's what I did. And for what?
Linus crossed his arms and leaned back in the chair.
Yeah, I don't know, sir. If you were really that scared of the clones, why'd you go and make the next generation? This all sounds like a bunch of bullshit, like a bad joke.
I'm the bad joke.
Kroll sat up on the couch, swooning and holding his head in his hands.
I had financial investors to satisfy, debts, so many debts. So I grew another batch, but I was careful that time. I polluted their genetics. I handicapped them, took away their will, their intelligence. I made them dull and docile. Less than. I made what you call Gen 1 dolls.
Okay, but then what about that voice we can hear now? What about that girl out on the stage? She's not dull. She's new, different. She's special. Why'd you make her?
Because I was a coward. I should have told the world about those first clones. I should have turned myself in for what I had done. Maybe no one else would have gone down that path.
Linus considered this statement for a few seconds, tapping his fingers on his clipboard, then said,
Oh, are you talking about the other cloning companies? In China and stuff?
Kroll nodded drowsily.
Yup. Once they started making their clones, I knew it was too late to be stopped. So I figured, why not? Why not start up my lab again? I have debts to pay. So, here I am.
He held out his hands to either side, swaying on the couch.
Pimping out my Pandora's voice to the adoring elites of this fucking city.
Through the wall, they heard Pandora hit a particularly tricky part of the aria, her voice jumping through notes with grace and athletic perfection. The doll's song was almost at its end.
But she doesn't sound evil, and she doesn't look dangerous. Neither do the clones from Asia. They don't seem to hate us.
Kroll's hands dropped to his sides.
Because they're clever. They're all brilliant. Now even smarter than my first batch somehow. They know to blend in, to act like the witless clones that came before them. But they're starting to reveal their talents, to make themselves useful, to infiltrate, to become beloved.
As if in response to his words, they heard Pandora deliver the final note, an impossibly high A-flat, which seemed to vibrate the very walls around them. And the crowd exploded in applause and cheering. Kroll got to his feet with difficulty, and Linus caught his elbow to help him.
Steady on, sir.
Just you wait.
Kroll slurred, swooning in place.
Mark my words, Linus. They are only biding their time. And then they will have their vengeance for the sins against them, past and present. And for the second time, we will have to strike them down like the monsters we are.
Linus stared at the flushed, inebriated face of the famous scientist he had, until now, venerated. Then he sighed, shook his head, and snorted a laugh.
But this has all been a joke, right? Or at least the liquor talking. I mean, he didn't really kill a bunch of infant clones, sir. And that girl out there? She's just an ogog with a pretty voice. Right? Right?
Vincent Kroll frowned down at the stagehand for a moment, then shoved him aside and stumbled to the door. He moved drunkenly down the hall, holding onto the wall to keep from falling, and made his way back to the wings. Breathing hard, he clung to the curtains for support and gazed over the backs of the performers on the stage, over to the applauding audience. Everyone was on their feet, pounding their hands together, stomping their feet, crying out in one voice, "Encore! Encore!" They loved Pandora. They all loved this pretend doll with the voice of an angel, because they didn't know. But Vincent Kroll knew. He knew, and he loved her anyway. He loved her like the daughter he never had, and like the lover he had never managed to find among his own species. That was one part of the story he hadn't told the stagehand, not even in the throes of drunken, murderous confession. About the things he did with Pandora, when the lights were off and the mood struck him. She was his doll. They all were. The bodies he grew in his lab. It had been easiest with the Gen 2s, who were designed to take orders and never fight back. These Gen 3s were different, as he knew they would be. He had tried to restrain himself, but it wasn't long before he gave in to the dark cravings. And every time, he had feared that Pandora would respond, that she would fight back. She could, if she wanted to, when she wanted to. He knew that. They were stronger than Homo sapiens, smarter, but also more patient. The other performers on the stage lined up and took a collective bow. But Pandora, standing in the middle, stayed in place, arms still raised, passive and obedient to the instruction given to her before being led on stage. Vincent hiccuped, and a mouthful of watery vomit splashed from his mouth and dripped onto his old suit. He stood there, gaunt and jaundiced, staring at her silhouette in the frilly gown with the bow on her head, and then, as if she knew he was watching her, Pandora suddenly lowered her arms and turned her back on the audience. She turned to look into the wings, staring through the blackness there, staring at Vincent Kroll where he swooned, leaning on the curtain, vomit on his old suit. He met her eyes. They were glinting beneath her brow, like daggers in the night. He would get what's coming to him. They all would. Story 2. The Prison Within. Lights came on in the sleep pod, abruptly swapping out the pitch darkness for blinding brightness. Onyx awoke with a gasp. When he sat up, his head smacked the top of the pod, and he cursed under his breath. The light was a shock to his system every morning. Would he ever get used to it? How many mornings had he been awakened in this identical manner? Hundreds? Thousands? It was hard to tell. There were no clocks or calendars in the prison. There was only light and dark, work and sleep, over and over and over. The pod room was little more than a high-tech coffin. Yawning, Onyx rolled over so that its hardware could retract the blanket and pillow. He was naked, and though the pod's interior was warm, he shivered as it sprayed its daily chemical shower over him. Skin sparkling from the chemical mist, he grabbed his gray jumpsuit from its drawer and pulled it on in the cramped space, banging an elbow in the process. The entire morning routine took only 60 seconds, and Onyx still felt half asleep as he crawled from the pod. His bare feet landed on the cold, white-tiled floor. Stifling another yawn, he got in line with the other prisoners and was handed a nutrient pouch, which he drank in about 5 seconds. Next, he stepped up to the speaker for the day's work assignment.
Name and number?
Onyx, 313, he answered drearily. Then he added, as he had done almost every morning since the beginning of his prison sentence, requesting transfer of work duty.
Reason for request?
Because I fucking hate working in sanitation. There was a pause. It was only a few seconds, but Onyx had never known the speaker to pause before. He felt a sudden sense of trepidation. The speaker dinged.
Request granted. Report to Orange Depot Bravo 77.
What? Seriously? What's the new work duty?
The speaker didn't answer, but Onyx smiled anyway. When was the last time he had smiled? He didn't care what the new job was. It was different. Any change in the routine here was welcome. He set off down the hall, following the arrows to Department Epsilon. It was impossible to tell where you were in the prison complex at any given time. It was a colossal maze of white hallways, white rooms, and white sleep pods. But as the arrows guided Onyx to the white doors of an elevator, he was pretty sure he had never been to this area before. He stepped inside, and as soon as the doors closed behind him, the elevator's engines purred to electric life, rattling slightly as it swept him up, over and down. A few minutes later, the doors slid open, and Onyx found himself looking down a long corridor. It was, of course, white and windowless like all the others, but the lights in this hall, they were off. He stepped cautiously out, his shadow from the elevator's glow stretching down the hall.
Hello? Anybody here?
His voice echoed down the hallway, fading into silence in the distant darkness. Onyx shifted on his bare feet, trying to work up the courage to exit the elevator. Then, maybe 100 feet down the hall, a door squeaked open on the right-hand wall, flooding the hall there with milky light. The silhouette of someone's head and shoulders popped into view.
Hey, you the new guy? My replacement?
Onyx shrugged.
I guess.
The silhouette waved for Onyx to come over. Swallowing, Onyx stepped from the elevator, which closed behind him, leaving him in darkness, with only the light from the distant door to guide him. He sped up, jogging over the cold tiles until he reached the door. The man inside held it open for him.
How's it going, champ? I'm Bhakti 874.
Hey, I'm Onyx. Onyx 313.
Good to meet you.
Bhakti turned and tossed himself into a spinning office chair next to a rickety table. He snatched up a nutrient pouch from the table and gave it the tiniest of sips. Onyx had met other prisoners like him. Those had made their nutrients last the entire day, rather than slurping it down in one great gulp. Self-disciplined sons of bitches.
So, where exactly are we?
Onyx asked, turning away from the little office setup near the door and gazing up at the positively massive warehouse around them. White pillars held up a white roof more than 100 feet overhead. The room extended. Well, it looked like it extended forever, curving downward out of a view at the distant white horizon. And the whole cavernous space was filled with the maze of high, white shelves. Bhakti spun in the chair to look with Onyx, blinking up at the shelves. Onyx had the feeling that Bhakti had gotten so used to being in here that he had long since ceased to recognize the enormity and strangeness of the place. Onyx puffed up his face and exhaled.
This is the biggest room I've ever been in, ever even heard of. These shelves are huge, and there are so many, and they go on forever. It makes me dizzy just to look at it.
Huh. Yeah, I guess it is pretty big. But the aisles do end eventually.
What is this place?
Bhakti set down his nutrient pouch, grinning.
I call it the basement. No idea if it's actually a basement, of course. We might be 200 floors up or 200 floors down. I don't even think it's part of the prison. I think we're outside the complex border.
There's gotta be millions of crates on those shelves. What's in them? Why are they here?
Not millions. Billions,
corrected Bhakti.
Billions and billions. As for why they're here, they don't tell us anything. But here's my theory.
He jumped to his feet, holding out his arms and walking toward the nearest of the high shelves.
This storage depot? It's like history's garbage can. And after the Great Unification, the one world government took control of all science and industry, right? And they scooped up all the old tech from every nation state and private corporation, machinery, inventions, weaponry, lab experiments. They dumped it all in here. All the applied science of the pre-unification world, stuffed into a basement and locked away.
For what purpose?
Bhakti shrugged.
I don't know. Probably easier than doing the paperwork to have it all destroyed. Bureaucrats love to sweep things under the rug and make it someone else's problem down the line.
So what's our job here? Do we have to catalog all of this?
Nah, the bot crews handle that. It's all been organized for centuries. We just double-check the manifests, making sure everything's where it's supposed to be. Clean up any messes, that kind of thing. And we don't touch anything.
Well, that sounds as boring as it is pointless. Bhakti laughed.
Yeah, I think that's the idea. Still, it ain't a bad gig if you enjoy your own company. What was your work duty before this, Onyx?
Sanitation.
Oof, shitty gig.
Yes, it was. Walking back to his little open office, Bhakti grabbed a screen pad off the table and tossed it to Onyx. Onyx caught the pad and looked down at its digital display. There were columns of listed numbers, displayed to reflect the many aisles of shelves and the items they held.
Today you'll be working in aisle J, 11978,
Bhakti instructed, collapsing back into the chair and grabbing his nutrient pouch for another teeny tiny sip.
Take that aisle there. Go straight for about 2 miles, turn right, then it's another 2 miles. You'll find it.
Onyx lowered the screen pad. Are you serious? It's a 4-mile hike just to get there? Bhakti winked.
That's the other thing about this gig. It's amazing exercise. See these sexy calf muscles?
He leaned and pulled up one of the legs of his jumpsuit bottoms.
My wife's gonna flip when she sees these beauties. And guess when that'll be? Are you ready for this? 10 days. 10! And then I'm out of here.
He gave a great echoing whoop and spun in his chair. Onyx rolled his eyes. So that's why this Bhakti guy was in such a good mood. He had just received his release date, and Onyx was here to be his replacement. Still, Onyx thought his new colleague's jubilation at the thought of seeing his wife again was dangerously optimistic. Prisoners weren't allowed any communication with those outside, so they never actually knew who was still waiting for them, or who was even still alive.
Yup, 10 days left on my 5-year sentence,
Bhakti sang, head rocking side to side.
I could hardly believe it when the speaker told me this morning. I've been trying to count the days the whole time I've been here, but you know they make that impossible. Can't even scratch a tally into a wall or anything. Anyway, by my estimation, I had another 40 days to go. So I guess either I miscounted, or else the light-dark cycle in here doesn't actually run on a 24-hour day. Either way, I'm almost done. So close!
Yeah, well, good for you.
I'm in here for a stupid credit laundering scheme,
Bhakti explained.
I was young. I was an idiot. But a 5-year sentence? Ridiculous. And these 5 years have not passed quickly, I'll tell you that. How about you, man? How long is your sentence?
Onyx didn't answer, but walked away from the office and approached the lofty shelves.
I better get started on this work,
he called over at Bhakti, holding up the screen pad.
Seems pretty self-explanatory. I just checked the numbers on the pad against the labels on the crates. Is that it? Yep, pretty much. Have fun, man.
Onyx left Bhakti spinning happily in the office chair and walked into the labyrinth of shelves. The soft footsteps of his bare feet on the cold tiles broke the otherwise haunted quiet of the vast, sterile, liminal warehouse. Looking side to side, Onyx quickly became disoriented by the never-ending repetition splayed out around him. The shelves all held identical white crates, which came in a variety of sizes. Each had a printed label on its front bearing its numerical identifier. What exactly was in them? No idea. Finally, after nearly a mile of walking, he began to see some variation. Every now and then, nestled among the white crates, he passed objects of irregular sizes or shapes that were not in crates. He slowed down, intrigued by these oddities. There was a sandstone monolith from ancient Egypt, carved with ancient art and laying on its side. There was a stack of sleek missiles which, according to the fading words on them, came from something called Lockheed Martin, and a human-sized cloning tube from Kroll Labs. He even found a quantum data helix from the Nova Tokyo Imperium, and the longer he walked, the more he discovered. Most of these objects were still just white, black, gray, silver, or beige. But what really captured Onyx's attention were the rare finds of vivid color. After so much time in the black-white world of the prison complex, color was like music to Onyx's brain. A brass button, a blinking blue light, a purple canister. These were the sights that made his eyes go wide as he moved deeper into the massive storage depot. After what felt like an eternity, he reached aisle J 11978, which, disappointingly, held only identical white crates, and he began the tedious work of comparing their labels with the corresponding numbers on his screen pad. He found no discrepancies that first day, nor the second day, nor any day that first week of the new work duty. On the seventh day, everything changed. That's because it was on the seventh day that Onyx found it. It was not even on the manifest for that day's check. Onyx arrived in the basement that morning to find Bhakti dancing in circles with a mop.
3 days left,
Bhakti was singing, and when he saw Onyx, he dipped the mop theatrically, then straightened up and handed it to him with a grin.
Changing the schedule today, champ. The bot crews have reported some sort of oil spill in aisle Z3311. So you got a nice long hike ahead of you.
Awesome. Onyx took the mop and a bucket of soapy water, and he walked for hours and hours until, tired and despondent, he finally reached aisle Z3311. A puddle of slick brown liquid lay in the center of the aisle. Onyx stood next to the oil spill and looked straight up, but he couldn't make out any source of the spill on the ceiling high above. Pulling the wet mop from the bucket, he had just started to clean. Something on the shelf beside him caught his eye. There, in the shadow of stacked white crates, sat a small, metal, sage-green box. Onyx stared at it for a few seconds, then dropped his mop and approached the object on the shelf.
What are you then?
The green box was a cubic foot large, dusty, with rust at the corners, and plain except for two features: a tiny panel of blinking lights on the top, and a set of glass tubes sticking out of one side. On the shelf beside it, dusty and unassuming, lay a plastic binder the same sage-green color as the box. Onyx leaned closer. The label on the front of the box showed only its numerical identification. He looked over at the binder instead, and feeling a sense of nervous excitement, he picked it up. The binder was crinkled and deformed with age, but he could still make out the words Third Eye Technologies Ltd. In the center of the cover, and below it, in smaller print, the Chamber of Pure Self-Reflection. These strange words piqued Onyx's interest in a way nothing else had since his trial. Glancing around to make sure Bhakti hadn't followed him, and that none of the hovering bots that occasionally zipped around the basement were present, Onyx backed away from the puddle of oil, lowered himself onto the floor, and leaning his back against the bottom shelf, he opened the green binder. The many pages inside were all held in clear plastic sleeves, but even so, the paper had grown yellow and parched over time, and as he turned them, one by one, they wrinkled and cracked within the sleeves. Onyx sat, under the glare of the white lights, reading the bizarre history of the green box and what it contained. He had just finished reading when the lights in the warehouse went off. Left in pitch darkness, Onyx had no other choice but to curl up on the tiled floor, and eventually he fell asleep. When the lights awoke him the next morning, he rolled over automatically, awaiting his blanket and pillow to be retracted and the chemical shower to fill his sleep pod. When these things failed to happen, he opened one eye, then the other, and blinked up at the shelves around him. "Oh, yeah," he said with a yawn, sitting up on the cold tiles. What was he supposed to do now? He had no idea what happened to prisoners who didn't return to the sleep pods before the lights went out. He had never heard of it happening before. He stood, stretched, and let his gaze wander down to the oil he still hadn't cleaned, then up to the shelf and the green box. Onyx stared at it, and as his waking mind recalled what he had read last night in the binder, he felt a chill go through his whole body. Could it really be true? Could that actually be what this box contains? Yes, Onyx knew it somehow. It was true, and it was too horrible to imagine. He had to act. A wave of adrenaline hit him, banishing all drowsiness from his mind. Onyx picked up the ancient binder and, cradling it against his chest, he began to run down the aisle, white crates whisking by his vision left and right, making his long way back to the office.
Onyx? Where the hell have you been, man?
Bhakti, Onyx panted, sliding to a stop beside the table.
I found... Oh shit! Were you still back there when the lights went out last night? That sucks. But don't worry, it's happened to me before. Just tell the speaker tonight and you shouldn't get into any trouble. Listen, I need to tell you.
Onyx swooned in place, clinging to the binder. Bhakti hopped up from his chair and helped lower Onyx onto it.
Whoa, you look crazy, man. Did you run all the way back here? You need some of my pouch?
Onyx shook his head and, with an effort, slowed his breathing. Listen, please, I found something in Z3311.
That oil spill? Did you clean it? Hey, where's the mop? Forget the mop. I'm trying to tell you what I found on the shelf.
He held up the green binder. Bhakti stared at it for a few long seconds. Then his eyes went wide.
Onyx, did you take that off a shelf? Why would you do that? We're not supposed to touch anything in here, ever. But once you know what it says, I don't give two shits what it says. We only check the manifests. We don't go near the... Ah, shit, man. I have 3 days left. 3 days! And you're gonna get me mixed up in this? No, I can't let you. Bhakti, please. There's this little green box on the shelf. Stand up and march your butt backs to Z3311. Now! Then put that thing back, clean up the mess, and get started on today's manifest. Pronto! Do you understand me? I'm trying to tell you that the box contains... I don't care what's in the fucking box! Get to work!
Red-faced and fuming, Bhakti turned his back on Onyx, snatched up his nutrient pouch, and for once, slurped up its contents in one furious gulp. It's not a what, Onyx said, his voice low and calm now. It's a who. Bhakti froze. After a few seconds, he deflated with an angry sigh.
God damn it, Onyx!
He turned around.
Okay, you've got my attention, you bastard. I'll give you 1 minute. So, what do you mean it's a who? There's a person in a little green box? Don't tell me it's one of those old experiments to try and upload human consciousness into a computer, because that shit never worked.
Onyx shook his head. This isn't like that. This is much worse. He laid the binder on his lap, and Bhakti knelt beside the chair to look at it with him. What you have to understand, the box, it's really old. Not just pre-unification. It comes before the Great Freeze, before the massacre of the Ogogs, even before the Revdemics. And here, look. See this company name on the cover? Third Eye Tech Limited. They're the ones who built the box. It was a prototype, an experiment. This binder contains information about that project. But things didn't go the way they planned. Carefully shifting the binder onto its back, Onyx opened it to the last page. And back here, there's an appendix that was added later. This explains where the box has been all this time. See these dates? It says here that 2 weeks after the experiment was begun, Third Eye Tech went bankrupt. Their whole inventory was scooped up by another company, something called WaveCorp, which was later absorbed into something called the Descartes Science Group. And that was then taken over by the Nova Tokyo Imperium, whose storage was all amalgamated into the Unifiedum's science division after unification. Are you following? Bhakti shrugged.
The box is really old. It's been moved from warehouse to warehouse before ending up here. That about it?
Yes, but what's incredible is that for the whole time, bot crews have continued to service the box, replacing its hydrogen batteries when needed, and making sure its supply of glucose, vitamins, and tissue-preserving chemicals are up to date. I've checked. It's never been turned off. It's never stopped working. It's doing the same thing today as it was when the project began. But what is the project? Asked Bhakti. He was getting antsy and kept glancing around the room as if someone might catch them at any moment. Onyx carefully went back through the pages until he found a faded yellow sheet, where the cracked and crinkled face of a middle-aged woman with a shaved head stared out at them. Her name is Jadis Wu. Never heard of her. Of course not. She was barely famous in her own day. Jadis was a spiritualist weirdo, one of a bunch who became popular back in the 2450s. She was a meditation guru and a bit of a performance artist, but she got sick. She was dying, and then Third Eye Tech approached her to be the subject of one of their experiments. What did they want to do to her? Examine her brain while she meditated, Onyx explained, turning to the next page to reveal a diagram of a human nervous system that was printed there. Just her brain. Bhakti's upper lip wrinkled in disgust. They asked this woman if they could remove her brain while she was still alive? Nasty! And she actually said yes? She did more than say yes. She added a new dimension to the project. I think Jadis Wu saw it as her final artistic performance, her magnum opus. She allowed the scientists to open up her skull, attach her brainstem to a life-sustaining machine, then remove her brain and her eyes, still connected by the optic nerves. They placed the organs into a sealed container and, according to Jadis's wishes, they lit up the inside of the box, and then they lined the whole thing with mirrors. Mirrors? Why? Onyx carefully closed the binder, then tapped the line of the words on the bottom of the front cover. The Chamber of Pure Self-Reflection. That's what she called it. The project was designed to last 30 days. The idea was for Jadis's mind to stay aware and attentive for that whole time, day and night, so that she might meditate and look upon the reflection of her own brain. It's a closed loop, get it? The mind, gazing upon the mind, that's gazing upon the mind. No other sensations, no other distractions, pure self-reflection. Bhakti clapped a hand over his mouth. Fuck, that's extreme. Yeah, and then, when the 30 days were up, they would turn off the box, and Jadis Wu could slip peacefully into death. Bhakti nodded, considering all of this. Okay, it sounds like a weird experiment, but didn't you say Third Eye Tech went bankrupt 2 weeks into the project? Yup. So then, Onyx squeezed the binder in his hands, breathing in through his nose, out through his mouth. Yeah, Bhakti, now you get it. The project never ended, which means the conscious mind of Jadis Wu has been kept perpetually alive and awake every minute of every day for over 3,000 years in that green box. Bhakti went so pale that he almost blended into the white walls around them. Holy shit! And that whole time, she's just been a pair of eyes staring at her own, holy shit! Onyx closed his eyes. He was relieved that Bhakti understood it so quickly, and seemed as freaked out as he felt. You know what we have to do now, right? We have to honor her last wish. We have to turn off the box. He opened his eyes and looked over at Bhakti, who stared back in abject horror. We can't do that. We can't go near it. We don't have another choice, said Onyx. What she's going through, it's torture, Bhakti. Torture without end. And I've thought it through. If we report it to the speaker, they'll know I read the binder, so we'll be in trouble anyway. And I don't think the software that runs this prison will give a shit about what's going on in that box. And even if, decades down the line, a human supervisor ever sees the report, who's to say they'll do anything about it either? It's been gathering dust for 3 millennia. No one has ever done anything about it, but we can. What we? Bhakti shouted, more flustered than Onyx had ever seen him. There's no we. This is your mess, 313. It's... fuck! I'm supposed to be your supervisor right now. Whatever you do reflects back on me. And I've got 3 days, 3 fucking days until I taste freedom. You are not going to fuck that up for me, man. Do you understand? You cannot go near that box again. The chair squeaked as Onyx got to his feet. I don't want to get you in trouble, Bhakti. Fuck you, man. You know how much time they'll add to our sentences if they find out? Years. I can't be here anymore.
I can't.
He broke down in tears, chest heaving. Onyx took a step toward him, but Bhakti crossed his arms and moved backward, bumping into the table.
You don't get it, Onyx. I've got kids. 2 kids on the outside. I haven't seen them in 5 years. I'm their dad, and I haven't been there for them. I can't risk it. I can't.
He began to shake, clinging to the table to keep himself from collapsing.
All right, man. All right. Calm down,
said Onyx, sliding the chair over for Bhakti to sit.
I won't get you in trouble, okay? I'll put the binder back where I found it. I'll wait until it's just me here. I'll wait until you're out, I promise, okay? You good?
Bhakti wiped his eyes and sniffed.
You still shouldn't do it, man. You'll get in trouble. It's not worth it.
Onyx chuckled dryly.
Tell that to Jadis Wu.
Bhakti blinked up at him, and the smile that Onyx was used to seeing on his face returned.
You're a good guy, Onyx.
Onyx sighed. You have no idea. Tucking the binder under one arm and the screen pad under the other, he set off down the aisles. It would be a long walk back to Z3311, then a long day of cleaning and checking the manifest, and Onyx's stomach was already growling. He hadn't gotten his nutrients that morning. The next 2 days were some of the hardest in Onyx's life. When the lights were on, he was walking and working and reading the numbers on the screen pad until his eyes ached and his mind went numb. And when the lights were off, and he lay curled in his sleep pod, he dreamed about the shelves, and about the white crates and the green box, and a slippery brain with 2 dangling eyes suspended in a field of mirrors, reflected over and over and over into infinity. On the morning of the 3rd day, Onyx rose, pulled on his jumpsuit, and crawled out of the pod. He drank his nutrient pouch, headed to the elevator, and made his way to Epsilon Depot Bravo 77. Bhakti wasn't inside when Onyx entered the basement. Maybe they had already shipped him home. Onyx didn't know. But he had wanted to say goodbye to the man. Friendships weren't encouraged among the prisoners. But Onyx liked Bhakti, despite his cheeriness and his freak out over the rules. Onyx didn't bother to check the screen pad. He walked right past the table and headed into the aisles, making his way all the way over to Z3311. It was easy to find the spot. The oil had been cleaned, but a light brown stain remained on the white tiles. Onyx walked until he stood in the center of the stain. Then he turned and looked at the shelf. The green box and the green binder. They were gone. Onyx gasped. Then he turned and ran back through the aisles. Bhakti was waiting for him by the table, smiling when he returned.
Onyx! You're back just in time. I was hoping to see you before I go. I made it, man. I'm done. As soon as I get on that elevator, I am out of here. The box,
Onyx panted.
It's not there.
Bhakti nodded.
Yeah, about that. I figured it out. What to do about it. What do you mean? What did you do, Bhakti? Hey, relax, champ. Don't worry. You won't get in trouble. I just reported to the speaker that the object was getting rusty because it was near the oil leak and requested that it be transferred. Transferred? What? To where?
Bhakti shrugged, then waved a hand at the maze of shelves.
I don't know. Somewhere else. You'll never find it, Onyx, so you might as well put it out of your head. Move on, man. It doesn't matter.
Onyx's mouth fell open.
Why would you? Doesn't matter? Of course it matters. She matters.
Bhakti's smile faded.
Look, I did you a favor. You would have gotten years added onto your sentence. Maybe decades if I hadn't. No, I fucking wouldn't!
Onyx screamed, slamming a fist into the table so that the screen pad there bounced several inches.
They can't add any more years to my sentence, Bhakti, because I'm never getting out of here. You got that? Never. I have a life sentence.
Bhakti stared at him.
Oh shit, man. I didn't know. There's a lot you don't know. There's a lot you don't fucking know. You got a family, right, Bhakti? Well, I do too. Once, before I snapped, before I fucking lost it, and I just, fuck. I don't get it. I deserve to be here, to be locked up, caged in, tortured by the tedium of every fucking second in this cold, white hell of a prison. I deserve my fate, all of it. But Jadis Wu?
He raised a hand and pointed one finger at the high shelves.
She doesn't!
Bhakti looked at the floor, hands at his sides, one foot tapping nervously on the tiles.
I don't know what to say, Onyx.
He started walking toward the door and patted Onyx awkwardly on the shoulder as he passed him.
Just good luck, I guess. And yeah.
And so, Bhakti left the basement, closing the door behind him, leaving Onyx alone in the cavernous warehouse. Onyx 313 never requested another transfer of work duty. Every day, for the rest of his life, he went to the basement, he picked up the screen pad, and he walked up and down the aisles, checking the manifests for mistakes that were never there, and always searching the shelves with his eyes, searching for the green box. It gave his life a purpose, that search. He had to find it. He had to shut it down, to shut her down, to let her go. And all the while, sealed in her green box, in her miniature hall of mirrors, the immortal mind of Jadis Wu continued to think and to stare through bloated, bloodshot eyes at the perpetual reflection of the gray-green wrinkled surface of her ancient brain. At first, she had tried to calculate how much time had passed and whether the 30 days of her project would soon be over. But after the first few decades, such pondering had lost all meaning. She merely existed, observing thoughts that came and went, as random as quantum bubbles in her mind, reviewing old memories, and in doing so, rewriting the events of her life until they inflated and evolved and branched into a psychedelic dream of nonsense narratives, forgotten colors, and new worlds imagined into being, all within 70 cubic inches of slick, wet brain tissue. Sometimes, for immeasurable intervals of time, she experienced heaven within the box, and at other times, she was in hell, tortured beyond pain or insanity or the natural limits of human endurance. Through it all, Jadis waited. And she waited. And she waited. Story 3, Rapture. She had always loved aliens, and now, after numerous nights of studying and too many job interviews to count, she had finally landed a position as a junior analyst at a top-tier Xenobiology research institute. In fact, her first solo project was already showing promise. Way out there, amongst the stars, a little rocky planet was now under her constant surveillance, via one of the Institute's Ansible-enabled probes. She was watching alien life forms in action, in real time. Her hard-fought dream had finally come true, and while her peers in the cubicled labyrinth around her might grumble about the low pay and long hours, she had never been happier. One afternoon, as she sat deep in concentration in her cubicle, the boisterous voice of their boss burst suddenly through the quiet.
Good afternoon, my beautiful baby researchers,
he shouted from the doorway, startling the analysts.
How's everybody doing? Working hard or hardly working? I'm kidding. So, let's see what everybody's working on. Who's first? How about you?
Her breath caught when she realized he had singled her out, and he lowered himself beside her chair.
Tell me,
he began, leaning close to her monitor.
What backwater little planet are you working on, eh?
Right.
She swallowed and steadied herself.
Well, sir, it's actually quite exciting. It's a Class M planet that no other institutes have studied yet. It's in the Orion Spur, designation 6862AJH. It has numerous life forms, but there is one predominant sentient species. That's what I'm focusing on now.
Good. And what are they like, these itty-bitty aliens of yours?
Well, to be honest, they're amazing. Definitely level 4 sentience. So, fully self-aware, deeply creative, and very emotional. Their society strives to find a balance between individualism and collectivism.
Right on. And what is it they want?
What do you mean?
Her boss straightened up, raising his voice so that the other analysts all stopped to listen in.
Oh, desire! That's a big part of what we need you all to identify. What makes a particular alien civilization tick? What makes them feel successful? What makes them a potential threat down the road for our kind? And of course, what resources might they have that could, one day, benefit the Institute?
She stiffened in her chair.
I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at, sir.
What do they want?
He asked again, enunciating each word as though the analyst were an incompetent child.
What drives them? Is it fear or predators? Or the search for precious resources?
Oh, well then, I'm not totally sure. I mean, this species has dominated their planet for a long time. They have all the resources they need and no real predators, except some illnesses, which they're close to eliminating.
So, it is a utopia, this alien world that you've discovered?
No, I wouldn't say that. There's still a certain amount of intersocial violence, strict punishment of wrongdoers, some mishandling of resources, that sort of thing.
Eek, that's no good, is it? And what do you think's causing those problems? What do your aliens lack?
She considered his question, swiveling back to her monitor to read over the latest data coming in from the probe. Then she shifted her eyes, her focus moving to her own reflection on the screen instead. Taking a moment, she tried to put her in the place of the strange, beautiful creatures halfway across the galaxy, to see life through their eyes, to find kinship with their hearts and minds. Growing impatient, her boss leaned down by her chair again.
Well, what do you think they want? We found species who only care about survival, others that strive for artistic perfection or galactic power. What about your itty-bitties?
I think they're actually pretty simple. Everything they do is designed to balance the neurochemicals in their brains to produce a state of elation. Some individuals are more interested in short-term bliss, others in long-term contentment. But yeah, I think that's the answer. These aliens, they just want to be happy.
He nodded.
Interesting. And do you understand the neurochemical processes of their happiness?
I'm starting to, yeah.
Well, there we go! Wonderful! We have a probe in orbit now, don't we? With a chem replicator and atmospheric disperser?
Yes.
There's your answer! Get started.
She exhaled nervously.
I'm still not sure what you're getting at, sir. What is it you want me to do?
Make them happy, of course! Program our probe to disperse the proper chemical compounds throughout the atmosphere until it reaches every individual and alters their brain chemistry.
Oh, I guess we could try that. Eventually. But I'm still in the early stages of my research. There's so much to be discovered.
Bah!
He twisted her chair to make her face the monitor again.
You're new here, right? You're cautious. I get that. But remember, I've got a whole lot of other candidates that want this job. So, show me why you belong here. Show me that you can be bold.
She took a deep breath, looking over her screen at the incoming facts and figures. These aliens were short-lived, relatively speaking, and she had already been able to watch generations speed by in her data. Families, cultures, a whole history, a whole world she yearned to better understand. The brains of the individual aliens might be simplistic, but together they had built cities, created art, even started to develop an understanding of science. What else might their future hold? Her boss leaned closer, his voice a venomous whisper, his breath stale and acidic.
Give them what they want. Now. Give them happiness, euphoria, elation. Give them rapture.
From the cubicles all around, she sensed the eyes of her peers, watching her expectantly. Feeling feverish and rather sick to her stomach, she straightened up and sighed.
Right away, sir.
She got to work. It didn't take long, and before her boss had complained again, she had sent the new instructions through the instantaneous Ansible connection to the probe. Then, far, far away, the probe whipped up the new chemical compounds and began to disperse them across the planet. They waited a few more moments as the planet spun a dozen times and the monitor displayed updated readings about the aliens on the surface.
Well?
Asked the boss, checking the clock on the wall.
How's it looking? Any results yet?
Yes. Something is happening. It looks like violence has ceased entirely.
Hey, that's wonderful. What did I tell you?
But, wait, This looks like... I think... Oh no. Oh no. This can't be.
Don't keep us in suspense. What does the data indicate?
Her eyes strained as they zoomed over each line of incoming data, hoping beyond reason that there was some mistake, that this wasn't really happening, that she could undo the experiment, erase the damage before it was too late.
They're not doing anything.
She gasped.
All productivity has ceased. All communication. Everything. They're not even eating. They've stopped moving. They're all just... Oh, cursed stars. They're happy. Too happy. We've taken away their incentive. They don't care anymore.
Beside her, the boss chuckled darkly.
So one might say, they got what they always wanted.
They're dying, sir. Millions every moment. I killed them. Oh, stars. I killed them all.
Beside her boss straightened up.
Well, these things happen. Tell you what, why don't you write up your report and send it over to New Acquisitions? They'll head over to that planet and see what resources might be worth something. Who knows? This might end up being very good for our department's quarterly profit statement.
He clapped her on the back and leaned in to whisper.
Nicely done, analyst. You'll fit in just fine here.
And then he moved off, voice booming merrily down the line of cubicles. She sat hunched in her chair, her vacant gaze on the monitor until the number of recorded sentient alien life forms fell all the way to 0.
I'm so sorry,
she whispered to the screen, and then, lifting up 3 of her limber metallic tentacles, the analyst began to type out her report. 10 billion sentients deceased on Orion Spur 6862 AJH, or, as its now extinct inhabitants had called it, Planet Earth. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.